Yeah, so I would just do a quick introduction. So, hi everyone, welcome to the OPAM workshop series. And today we are really honored to have Dr. Sarah Merrill as our speaker. So, Dr. Sarah Merrill is an assistant professor from the department. I hope I got all the information correct.
Yeah.
She's an assistant professor from the Department of Psychology of UMass Lowell, and she got her PhD in developmental psychology from Cornell University, and then she did her postdoc at the University of British Columbia and Brown University. And she had plenty of successful experiences for fellowship applications and was a recipient for NSF graduate fellowship. So I'm really looking forward to how to get writing a more competitive NSF and the generally speaking fellowship applications. So without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Sarah Merrill.
Thank you very much. A beautiful introduction. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much to OPAM and the wonderful organizers for inviting me and for planning this talk that I think will hopefully be very helpful. I think a lot of the information around funding, fellowships and grants and applications is actually very word of mouth. There's kind of an institutional knowledge about these things that if you didn't know to ask, then you wouldn't necessarily know that some of these things are true. And so I'm hoping today that this can be a really practical guide to applications, especially the NSF GRFP, of which I am a fellow. That was a fellowship that I got when I was a graduate student. It's a great opportunity. And so we'll have a bit of an emphasis on this, but we'll talk about other funding mechanisms in particular, and then about applying for fellowships in general, things that would be helpful regardless. Okay, so the first thing that we really need to start with is the reviewer mindset. If you want to receive funding for your fellowship, what you really need to do is have the reviewers believe you. So my question is, what do you think reviewers need to believe most? Do you think it's that the idea is exciting, that the methods are really strong, that the science is really smart, or that the applicant is really fundable? This is a real question because I would love for this to be reflective and interactive. Definitely ask questions when you have questions, but I will ask you questions, and I would love it if someone would respond, please. So, what do you think reviewers need to believe the most?
Yeah, I guess I will just start. I think
Thank
I guess like the idea is a very important part,
you.
because I do think like a lot of times reviewers defined. Oh, I saw somebody in the chat also said all of the above, but I'm personally speaking, I think the idea is really important.
Yes. Well, and the idea is really important, and all of the above is absolutely true, right? But when it comes to whether or not you receive funding for a fellowship, not necessarily a grant, but for a fellowship, it comes down to whether or not you are fundable. And I think that this is something that comes up a lot with graduate and postdoctoral fellowships, especially when it's around training or supporting you as a scientist, is that this is actually the story that you're trying to tell. Not that your idea is amazing or your methods are really strong or the science is filling a gap. All of those are things you need to say, but because all of those are things that support that you are worth funding, right? So your job is not to convince the reviewers that you know everything. It's to convince them that you ask good questions, you make careful decisions, and you can use this support to become a stronger, better scientist, right? This is an investment in you, and you are selling your potential as a scientist, right? It feels like you're selling a great idea, or it feels like you're selling, really rigorous methods. I know I was there. Like I've been there, I've done that. I have made that mistake actually. But I think that this is something that's really important to know, again, especially for postdoctoral and graduate fellowships, training programs, that all of that is in support of what a good scientist you are, right? So over the course of this workshop, we'll talk about some funding mechanisms and how to think about them in your career stage, your eligibility, and your research area, which are all kind of related. How to translate a research idea into something feasible for a fellowship proposal, how to distinguish intellectual merit from broader impacts. This is specific for the NSF GRFP, but realistically, it will need to be incorporated into any fellowship application. And then how to structure your NSF GRFP personal statement and graduate research plan. Again, this will be specific to the NSF GRFP, but is broadly applicable to other types of personal statements or plans. And then how to build a timeline and think about how to ask for letters. What's that process? How do you get the best letters? Things like that. All right. So what are fellowship reviewers really evaluating? First of all, they're really evaluating you. And then above that, they are asking the question. So what is the actual scientific question that you want to ask? Your stakes. Why does it matter? What is it going to do for the field, for society? What is the larger implication, right? The preparation. Is this applicant, are you actually prepared to do it? Because this could be a great question with broader implications, but you might not actually have the resources, the time, the training to be able to answer that question. So that's something that is really important, and that really addresses feasibility, which we will talk about, and timing. Why is this the next right step in your development, right? And so that also leads to the preparation. You need to be prepared to do this, but it should also add to your development. No one wants to give you money to just keep doing what you're doing, right? They want to give you money to give you opportunities to improve your training, right? This is you as an investment. And so when you're writing these fellowship applications, you should be saying to the reviewers, this is why I'm a good investment, and this is why this next step will make me a better, stronger, faster scientist, right? So when you're thinking about applications for fellowships in general, but NSF GRFP in particular, we are talking about applicant-centered fellowship applications, right? So your research plan matters and your personal statement matters, but it's really about how was this evidence? How is a great question and broader impacts and feasibility? How are they evidence that you have a lot of scientific potential? Have I hit this over the head enough? I hope so. I think it's hard because I think us as scientists, we're so invested in our questions and the method of how to answer this in the best way we can think how, and like that should be the thing. But it's really about what do those things say about you, right? So you have to decide first and foremost what mechanism you actually want to apply to. Now that you know that all the fellowships are actually looking at you, which fellowship would be right, right? So I would say start with fit, not prestige. Even if there's a more prestigious fellowship, if there's one that fits you better, go for that, right? The more that you can meet the ideal criteria, the better you are likely to be funded by that mechanism, right? And so the first thing that you want to know is just, are you eligible? I will be honest that a lot of eligibility for graduate fellowships and some postdoc fellowships are restricted to US citizens or US citizens and permanent residents, right? So I do want to give that as a caveat. We'll talk about that in a minute, but there are citizenship requirements for a lot of the fellowships we're going to talk about today and that you'll hear about in general, especially working at any US university. But other countries, if you are working with or at other universities, for example, I did my postdoc in Canada, so I'm very familiar with their funding structure. So if you have any questions at the end of this about other countries' funding, feel free to send me an email and ask. So the first thing you want to check is, are you actually eligible? Because don't waste your time applying for something you're not eligible for, right? Does it actually match your research type, right? If you're doing something on vision and perception that actually has a lot of relevance for maybe health, right? Or uh, just the medical field in general, you might want something more like NIH, right? But if you're doing something that maybe informs eyewitness testimony, you might want something more legally oriented, right? So not all fellowships are created equal in terms of the type of research that they're looking for. And you want to be the type of research that they're looking for, right? And the last is to think about who is your imagined reviewer. Not all of these fellowships have the exact same person. They have a different ideal applicant, right? So the research type and the imagined reviewer, they're kind of related, but you want to be speaking to your audience, right? This is not just you're writing for a generic scientist who is, going to say this is a good research question. You're writing for a reviewer for a particular fellowship who's evaluating your potential, right? So some options, we're not going to go in depth with everything, but just to put out there, because we're going to talk a lot about the NSF GRFP today. But there are other options too. And I know the NIH F31 in particular is very popular as well, especially if you have a health relevant angle, right? The NSF GRFP is kind of the go-to though for cognitive, perceptual, behavioral psychology students. They do a lot of funding of understanding science mechanism and basic scientific processes. So it does fit a lot of folks who would be related to OPAM, right? And specifically, there is an NSF Behavioral and Cognitive Science division, right? It provides 3 years of support. You get $37,000 a year as the annual stipend, and then another $16,000 a year educational allowance. And you can apply either in your first or second year of your PhD, right? Also, NIH T32 training grants are sometimes very helpful. We'll talk about them more when we talk about the postdocs. But can also fund pre-doctoral trainees. But these are institutional grants, so that's not a grant that you apply for. That is something that exists, that someone else has applied for to create a mechanism for training, and then you apply for positions within that. And then the NDSEG, I don't know if it's NDSEG or NDSEG fellowship. It is highly competitive, but it also follows you. It's only open to US citizens. My understanding is it is not open to permanent residents, just US citizens who are getting a doctoral degree in cognitive, neural, or behavioral science, and is a really good fit for probably a lot of folks in OPAM. Some smaller grants as well that might be worth knowing about. And the reason we have our snowball on the side here is because grants also snowball, fellowship snowball. Getting some smaller fellowships or grants are evidence that you are a fundable applicant. Now, does it feel a little bit unfair that being funded makes you seem more fundable? Sure, but it is the way of things, right? So the more funding you have, including some of these smaller grants, maybe your university has some grants, maybe you've won some awards for research, maybe at an OPAM conference. All of those things really help build up a CV, especially for a graduate student, to show that you are productive, that you are being recognized by other people in your field, and that you are a fundable person, right? Again, we're looking for that evidence that you are a good investment as a scientist. So don't discount smaller awards for their ability to then bolster your CV for larger awards, right? So things like student research grants from APS or APF or APA, right? Or OPAM, for example, like the OPAM Professional Development Award, or even travel awards can be really, look very good on your CV, right? Show that you are a person who deserves funding because you are fundable, right? And if you're not sure which mechanism you fit best, you should discuss this with your mentor or your PI, because they, I'm sure, have good advice for probably things I didn't even mention here, right? For our postdoctoral fellows, generally speaking, when we're talking about postdoctoral fellowships, we're talking about transitioning towards independence. So what that means is you've been a graduate student, you have your PhD, you've done your thesis, Now, how do we go from you being a postdoc who works under another PI to being a PI in your own right, right? For this, there are NSF postdoctoral fellowships, but also the NIH F32. You saw for the graduate students, it was F31. For the postdocs, it's F32. Again, those T32 postdoctoral slots are very competitive, but can be great, and might be one of the most available funding sources for postdoctoral slots because they are guaranteed for a number of years with that training institution. And with our current state of funding, they're a little bit more stable, which can be great. And again, you're not applying for the T32, you're applying for a position with a training program that has a T32. And that can be great. And you see them a lot at big universities, but also hospitals, and sort of hospital adjacent research centers. The NIH K99 RU or R00 is probably one of the most career-defining award for postdocs who want a faculty position. So the K99 is your mentored postdoc, and then the RU is the actual funding for your first couple of years as a faculty, right? So it actually funds you to transition. It's very competitive, but if you get one, it is very, very useful on the job market because you basically walk in bringing your own funding from the very beginning. And then there are also fellowships, and I would very much encourage you to look into for specific people studying specific things. For example, L'Oreal has a Women in Science Fellowship that they include cognitive and perceptual sciences in particular, or the APA has a minority fellowship program. So I also really recommend that. There's a lot of opportunities out there. And again, don't discount things that are a little bit smaller. It's all about the funding snowball, right? So here are some OPAM specific tips for funding. NEI is your friend. The National Eye Institute actually funds a ton of perception and visual attention. And it doesn't necessarily always seem eye related. You might think, oh, well, but I don't actually study the physical eye. The National Eye Institute loves OPAM style work. So don't sleep on any eye just because you think you're not looking like at the physiological structure of the eye. The Psychonomic Society offers lots of travel grants and early career awards and are very friendly to cognitive and behavioral and visual perception work. And you should check and see what T32 grants are out there for vision science, cognitive neuroscience. Again, a lot of research hospitals, centers, and they can be some of the easiest first funding to get. And then a visual cognition publication from an OPAM talk can also strengthen your publication. So going and presenting at OPAM conferences, that is a great thing to have on your CV as well. So eligibility. You may not always fit these mechanisms. I told you about several mechanisms that would be useful for you, but you may not actually fit them. These are some common reasons why you might not, and you should check them before you invest your time in writing a grant, right? So first is citizenship or residency. If you're not a US citizen, like I said, there's a lot of things that aren't open to you of the things that I just discussed. There's also foundation fellowships like the Ford Foundation. They also require US citizenship. International students have a little bit less of a field to work with, unfortunately. Your career stage, right? So NSF GRFP is only for years 1 and 2, right? Your F31 is for graduate students. Your F32 is for postdocs. So know, what career stage is appropriate. Your field of study, right? So for example, if you're looking at something that the National Eye Institute would like versus if you're looking for something that is very basic science versus if you're looking for something that is very health related, right? Know your field, know what's out there for those. Similar for that, for the research type, right? Like, do you have a clinical angle or do you have like a very mechanistic output, right? Your degree program matters. So whether or not you are a PsyD, an MD, a PhD, a master's student, right? There several of these have requirements that you must be a PhD, sometimes that you must be a PhD in a particular field, even. So keep an eye out for that. Also, prior award history. Once you have an NSF GRFP, there are some other federal fellowships you can't have at the same time, right? So keep that in mind. If you, for example, if you apply for two, that you could actually only have one, right? Your institutional eligibility, some of these require nomination by your institute. A lot of the foundation ones require that. And they might only be able to put forth 3 people, for example. So that's something to check with. Generally speaking, that's not true of the big federal awards, but can be true of smaller foundation fellowships. And then your proposed research scope. This is something to keep in mind. We'll talk about this again when we talk about feasibility. But if you have like this grand scientific, program that you want to do, but you're applying for a 2-year postdoc, that just doesn't seem feasible. That's not realistic. So know for how long you're actually going to be funded, and be mindful of what is realistic to do in that time frame. Right. And when in doubt, email your program officer, right? PO, if anybody's heard that before, like, oh, I talked to my PO, those are program officers. They are great to talk to. If I can give you one other piece of advice other than you are the thing being evaluated in these fellowships, it's talk to a program officer. You aren't penalized for asking questions, right? There is no downside to talking to your PO, and nobody knows these programs better, and nobody can answer your questions better than your program officer. And having somebody in the process who thinks that you're great and your research is great can be very helpful. Okay, so that was a lot. So we're gonna do a little mechanism fit check. Take a second. This is a moment of reflection. So if you have like a word processor, or if you have like a notebook or something, take a minute and think about one of the fellowships that you're interested in applying for. And what's one reason you fit this mechanism? And what's one reason you might not, or you might need to think about or verify? Things like citizenship, career stage. Oh, yeah. Also, if you are a candidate, a PhD candidate or not, right? If you've done I've heard it lots of different ways, your comprehensive exam, your A exam, right? Your quals. Sometimes that matters as well. Your field of study, etc. So we'll give it a second.
Hi, Dr. Merrill. There are some questions actually in the chat
Oh,
from the
great. Oh, I
yeah,
wasn't manning the chat. That's
yeah, yeah.
okay. For NSF GRFP, do you typically have to pass quals to first apply? No, actually, NSF GRFP is geared towards early graduate students. So you can actually only apply in your first or second year, usually for most folks before their quals. But great question. For the NSF GRFP, haven't the requirements changed so that you can't apply in your second year of your PhD program only 1 year or before joining a program? Oh, so it used to be that you could apply both your first and second year, and then they changed it to you could apply your first year or your second year, but not both. They might have changed it again. I didn't see that when I was doing research for this, but I will double check on that, Doris. And I will send an email to your wonderful organizers and confirm. But thank you for checking that. Yeah, so it used to be you could apply 3 times. You could apply before your first year and your second year. And then they were like, you can only apply your before and first or second year. So, but also, the entire NSF board was fired, so things might be different now. Okay, thank you for taking this moment to reflect on mechanism. So we are going to move forward specifically on the NSF GRFP. So this is what we're going to talk about the most today in terms of the actual content. What goes in this? What is this? right? How do you write an NSF GRFP? So this is an early graduate training, right? So it supports your students. You have to be in a STEM field, right? And again, reviewers are evaluating you as a scientist, not just your project. Your project is evidence of you as a scientist, right? There are two main factors that you are being evaluated on. The first is your intellectual merit. So does the proposed work actually advance knowledge in the field? What is the merit of your intellectual contribution? And your broader impacts. Does the work benefit society or contribute to desired societal outcomes? So do you contribute intellectually to your field? Do you contribute to intellectually to broader society, right? What is the meaning of your work? And then finally, feasibility, right? We've talked about this a couple of times. It'll keep coming up. Is it realistic? Can you realistically do this work within that fellowship period? Either in the training that you have, the resources that are available to you, the mentorship that is available to you, and just time. Something I see a lot with folks applying for the NSF GRFP is that there is an underestimation of how long some things take. I will say that. Um, oh, thanks. Thanks, Doris. I appreciate that. Okay. So the current format is 3-page personal statement, 2-page graduate plan. You have to have 1-inch margins, Times New Roman font, and 11-point font minimum. They are actually pretty serious about the formatting. That doesn't seem like a big deal, but it will when you are cursing the 2-page limit, right? And both statements must address an intellectual merit and broader impacts with separate headings, right? And just as a submission note, you will select your major field of study to determine your deadline and your review panel, right? So those are different, right? If you're choosing to go to a different review panel, you'll have a different deadline. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, so how do you build the right question from the start? You have a great idea, right? How do you turn it into a fellowship? A well-formed research question is your foundation, right? So there are 3 things that really help you make the right question out of a cool idea. And the first is that you have a precise testable claim, right? Your hypothesis. Is your hypothesis really a hypothesis, right? Can you test it? Do you have a clear method? It makes sense how to test it. So I have a cool idea that I have turned into a research question. How do I test it? Does the way that I test it make sense? And will the field learn something from the outcome of that test? Those are the 3 criteria you're really trying to fulfill. Anytime that you're thinking about like, well, what about this? Can you test it? Is there a clear method to do so? And what do the results of that mean for your field? Right? So a topic is your area, but your proposal makes a claim, right? So if your topic is attention and visual memory, then your proposal is how does attentional prioritization alter the precision and durability of visual working memory representations, right? I want something that's testable. That is a testable question, right? And I can think of multiple methods, but I can think of methods that address this, right? So you can think of like a template to sharpen your own question. And we have another little activity. So either for template 1 or template 2, think about your own work and maybe think of an idea that you're thinking about for your fellowship and see if you can fill in the blanks for either of these. Take a minute. If you can't fill it all 4 blanks, that's useful information, right? Because that also tells you where your proposal logic might need more work, right? So if you say, I can think of, what changes what, right? But I can't think of what it'll clarify, right? I can just think that, well, that's an interesting question. I want to know what the relationship between these two things are. What does it clarify? What does it reveal, right? Um, and you'll notice that really the first one or two blanks are that first question, what am I testing? Then the first one or two blanks is, how am I doing this methodologically? And then the last blank is, and what does it mean? What do the results mean? Does anyone want to share their filling in of the template? No, that's okay.
Uh,
I have some options as well, some examples. So you could say, my project asks whether feature-based attention changes the precision of visual working memory representations using a delayed estimation task, because this will clarify whether attention modulates memory quality rather than memory access alone, right? So that's using that first template. And the second example, using the second template, I propose to test whether sleep deprivation impairs emotional memory consolidation, right? By measuring recognition accuracy and physiological arousal in healthy adults across sleep and wake delay conditions, right? Which will reveal whether sleep selectively preserves high arousal memories or protects all encoded content equally, right? So we really want to say, okay, what are we doing? How do we test it? With what? In whom? And for what purpose? Right? Does that make sense? So the why this, why now, why me test, right? This is a good thing to think about when you're thinking about your broader impact and your intellectual merit, right? Reviewers are not funding certainty. They are funding you, and therefore they are funding your good judgment, right? Everything doesn't have to be perfect. My old PI would tell me very often, perfect is the enemy of good, right? You want it to be really transparent and clear and understandable, right? Because no science is absolutely perfect, right? So here are the things that you do need to show, right? Not that your science is perfect, but that the question is important. It's worth actually answering. That what does the field get from it matters a lot, right? Ultimately, intellectual merit and broader impact both collide at and who cares about this, right? What are we getting from this? So that is actually one of the most important parts of this fellowship. The approach is feasible. So the design can actually answer the question within the period. Feasibility, I'm telling you, is something that a lot of people struggle with when they write their proposals the first time. The applicant understands the field. The framing shows awareness of prior work and its limits. Put your question into context, right? Don't make the reviewer work for it. Give them the context of this is where the field is currently, right? Here's where my research will take us further, and here's why it's important to do so. Again, fits the timeline. It's appropriate for a trainee, comes up a lot. And that your results will be informative either way. This is also really important, and I will say this is important for every fellowship, grant, any kind of funding that you go for. Even if your hypothesis is wrong, what do we still get? Because if I'm giving you this money, I want you to be able to contribute to the field regardless of whether your hypothesis is right or wrong, right? This needs to be constructed in such a way that it is always going to be elucidating of something important, regardless of how it goes, right? And so you don't need to solve the whole field. You need a well-scoped, testable question that actually has results you can interpret and add to the field, right? So here are some common things that happen that prevent people from getting funding, right? And this is true, again, for the GRFP, but really all graduate and postdoctoral fellowships, right? So if it sounds like a whole dissertation, or it sounds like a 5-year R01, or it sounds like a 10-year agenda, then that's great, but it's not really fundable because you can't do it in the time that you have, right? So the first problem is that the question is too broad, which also feels like you are going to have to do a lot of work over a long period of time in order to get to all the pieces. But being specific is your friend here. Specificity is good. You have your niche, lean into it, right? You don't want an unclear hypothesis. Make it very clear. What are you testing, right? What are you testing? How are you testing it? Why does what we find from it matter? The methods don't match your question, right? Be careful because sometimes you might, I've seen this with folks where the method is cool, it's really interesting, or it's very new, it's the new paradigm in the field, or it sounds very fancy, but it actually doesn't quite answer the question that you're trying to test, right? This is what we just talked about again, because and I'm going to say it one more time too, having an alternative explanation. If you don't succeed, what do we still learn? Right? If you get no result, what does that mean? How is that still useful? Your design needs to be a useful contribution, whether your hypothesis is right or not. Too many studies, again, don't overload your period. Be specific. Study the thing you're studying, right? And this will also help your aims all make sense together. If they're not too broad and you don't have too many studies and you are only using methods that actually answer the question that you're asking, then your aims will be well connected. This is sort of a consequence of all of the other failure modes, right? And don't just tack your broader impacts on at the end. This happens a lot too. Is like, oh yeah, and it'll be important for society, right? This is something that you actually want to think about and have sort of integrated and nodded to throughout your work, and not just sort of the last paragraph is. And you know, people who aren't specifically in my field will care about it too, right? The other thing to think about is reviewer psychology. I don't know if you've heard this before, but this was very helpful for me in learning to write fellowships and applications. A reviewer for any of these programs is going to read 30 applications minimum in a weekend. And they are looking for easy ways to say yes and easy ways to say no, right? And so you want to make it easy. Don't make them work for it. Make it really easy to follow, really clear. It's all about communicating this to your reviewer, right? And those unacknowledged problems that they have that are either become glaring or that they really have to dig for are more damaging than just acknowledging a limitation and what you're going to do about it, right? Limitations are not bad for you. So when you're thinking about your proposal, you need a clear argument. There has to be structure. It has to be easy to follow. The easier it is to follow, the more likely you are to be funded because the less hard a reviewer needs to work for it, right? So first, what is your problem or gap? What does the field not yet know? And why does the gap matter, right? You're going to set the stage, the context of your work. Here's where the literature is. Here's what we don't know yet, right? This is why this work is insufficient. Why haven't we already done this, right? What is the limitation? What are you addressing, right? Then what are you doing about it? What are you proposing that we should do, right? Other people haven't done it yet. What are you doing? Right? Why is this the right way to answer that question? And then your expected contribution. What will the field know after your project that it doesn't know? Right? Don't be too broad. Don't have too many aims. Don't be unclear. Make sure your methods match. Right? When you are, a lot of these fit into the proposed approach. Right? So really think about that. You're like, this is my problem. This is why people haven't done this already, right? Here's what I'm going to do differently. Be so specific and testable about that. That's where a lot of these fail, right? In terms of is there a question?
Yeah, I don't know if you plan on going into this already, but do you think you could like expand on like who reads the application, like how many people for from like the reviewer's perspective and like their kind of
Oh, yeah.
characteristics?
So it tends to be, well, it's people invited by NSF, right? It tends to be people who have received NSF funding previously, right? And some people will turn them down, right? But they do try to give you folks who are in your area of review, which is why your review panel matters, right? So if you are doing something on fMRI, like you will probably have people who know fMRI, right? As your reviewers, so that when you are making an argument like this is why this is the right method for that, they'll be able to evaluate that. Whereas if you are doing, eye tracking and looking time in infants, right? That's a different level of expertise, or well, a different expertise. And so you would be at a different, so the same overall panel, but a different set of reviewers. So you can expect to have your reviewer be somebody who knows your work. You have multiple reviewers. Usually, you have two reviewers who will review you and give feedback. But there's also a panel that discusses you, and you are presented to the panel, right, by the people who are reviewing you when they make their final decisions. You'll also get reviews back, right, to give you feedback on that. NSF also has like an honorable mention where, you were scored highly and you maybe didn't get the award, but it's still something you can put on your CV. You still get that feedback. And then you could apply to another funding mechanism potentially with those same ideas and that feedback, because a lot of this is useful regardless of where you're going. Does that make sense, Nikki? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks.
Awesome. Great question. Great question. Reviewer psychology definitely matters. Excellent. So NSF requires both intellectual merit and broader impacts. So your intellectual merit is, how will this advance knowledge? How will this advance what we know, right? And so you can show how you planned your research, how you work independently. Remember, we're evaluating you, how you interpret your findings, how you persist through challenges. But the key here is to do evidence, not adjectives, right? And we'll talk about that in a second. And the broader impacts is, how will this benefit society? So intellectual merit, like how does this benefit our broader knowledge base? Broader impacts, how does this benefit society, right? Be specific. Do not be generic. It's really easy to think about being generic with this. You want to be specific. You want to connect it to experiences that you have had, right? Make it personal to you. We're evaluating you, right? So I will mentor underrepresented students. It's not where you want to end up. So an example, I will mentor underrepresented students. That's a weak example. A stronger example would be, I will expand an existing lab mentoring structure by developing a 4-session visual cognition module for first-generation undergraduates with pre-post feedback and a pathway into RA positions. Why is this stronger?
Because it has a physical way for people to know how you will achieve this goal.
Exactly. It names your audience, your activity, your evidence, and it gives your letter writers something concrete to actually say and support, which is also very helpful, because broader impacts and intellectual merit also need to be in your letters from your letter writers, in addition to the things that you are writing, right? Thank you very much. So for your broader impacts, be specific, be feasible, connect to your own personal experience. Don't let them be ornamental, tacked on, or just generic, right? I will help people is not a successful broader impact, even if it's true, right? Let people imagine what this broader impact, once you have it, actually looks like. So be specific, name your audience. Who are you helping? Who in particular? Your activity. What are you doing? Your structure. What infrastructure are you putting into place to make this happen, right? Connect it to your work and to your personal experiences, if that makes sense, right? But linking it to your research wherever possible, very helpful, because then it makes it feel very integrated, the broader impacts and the intellectual merit, right? Support by evidence, always evidence. Don't just tell me about it. Tell me what you're going to do and tell me how that relates to what you have already done, right? Feasible, again, have this be actually grounded in what is realistic, what is possible, what resources you have, right? If your broader impact is, I'm going to cure world hunger, that's great, but I maybe don't believe that that is feasible in this 3-year fellowship, right? And measurable. How can you quantify this, right? Because you can say, I want undergraduates to feel more supported in their research. That's great, but what does that look like, right? How do you actually measure that? Because the more evidentiary and measurable you can make your broader impact, the better it is. This is something that comes up a lot with the broader impact, that it's just very kind of generic and feel good, but it doesn't have the brass tacks of like, but what are you really doing? How are you really measuring it? Right. And remember, your letter writers, they need to talk about your broader impacts, and they can only support something that you've already been able to be concrete for them. Right. So some examples would be increasing participation of underrepresented groups in STEM. NSF loves that. Improving STEM education and educator development, public engagement with science, mentoring of students, collaboration across sectors or fields, interdisciplinary, very popular, building user-friendly tools, and creating infrastructure for research and education, right? These are all examples of something a little less, I'm going to make the world a better place. But even these, they need specific evidence, specific measurable outcomes, and a connection to you and your work, right? For the intellectual merit, you also want more than my idea is smart. You want the evidence. You want something quantifiable. You don't want it to be generic, and you don't want it to be adjectives, right? So you plan how you plan and conduct research. Show a specific project that you designed, right? That you took a leadership role in, that you can work independently. Describe a decision you actually made without being told to do. Give me an example of this, right? Show, don't tell is the name of the game with intellectual merit, right? You collaborate effectively. All right, the name of collaboration, what your role was, why was it effective, right? That you can interpret and communicate findings. Cite your presentation or paper or report that you produced, right? That you take initiative. Cool. Describe a question that you pursued beyond what was assigned to you, or that you can persist through challenges. Very popular. NSF loves persistence. Then name a challenge, name a setback, name something that happened in your work that was a disappointment. And what did you do next, and how did you push through it, right? Reviewers cannot evaluate what you don't show them. I am passionate about research is not what you're looking for. I redesigned my analysis after it failed is, right? Show, don't tell. Give me an example, right? So the two criteria must appear in the personal statement and the graduate research plan, and they have to be like with a heading, right? And then also your reference letters and your activities and experiences, that's, your CV basically, you want it to be demonstrated. So your reviewers aren't going to have a specific heading, but it is expected that your intellectual merit and broader impacts are in your letters. You want to ask your letters to address both criteria with that specific evidence we talked about, right? Because that will help significantly. It'll also make your whole package tied together, but you really want to make sure that those letters have intellectual merit, broader impact evidence in them, right? Another way to think about this is also that your personal statement is like a narrative CV. I don't know if anybody's heard about this. They're kind of newish on the scene. Some American fellowships do ask for this, for like foundation fellowships, but mostly European and Canadian fellowships will ask for this. And it basically says, turn your CV into a prose about your journey. So things like Wellcome Trust, CFAR, European Research Council, they ask for this. And essentially you want to answer the same questions that you want to answer in your personal statement for the NSF GRFP. How have I contributed to the generation of knowledge? How have I contributed to others? How have I contributed to my discipline and beyond? And how have I changed how I think or work over time, right? So your personal statement asks you to do exactly what the CV does. Explain your contributions in context. Don't just list them. Don't just list, I published these papers, I presented at these conferences. What does it mean? What am I learning about you from this, right? How am I learning about how good of a scientist you are and how you're developing as a scientist from these things, right? Your output should be explained, not listed. Give context. What was hard? What was learned? What changed you? What changed your mind about things, right? How you contributed right? And your contributions to others also matter. So things like mentorship and collaboration. And the reader should understand not just what you did, but who you are becoming as a scientist, because that's what's really important, right? So you should start with your scientific identity. Then you go to your research experience and skills. What have you learned to do, right? And with evidence, you need evidence for everything, right? Your trajectory or turning points. This is a great place to put those challenges, right? I had a challenge that I overcame, or I experienced something that changed how I thought about this and I went a different way, right? And how have you navigated those? Or how did I overcome something, right? And then broader impacts and future goals, because you do need broader impacts in your personal statement, right? What will you contribute to the field? How does GRFP support you to be someone who contributes to overall society, right? And again, evidence beats assertions. Don't say, I am a persistent scientist. Say, when our primary measure showed ceiling effects, I redesigned the task. Don't say, I work well independently. Say, I identified a gap in the lab's analysis pipeline. I taught myself, the relevant method and applied to these specific projects, right? Show, don't tell. Don't just say, I am a thing. Say, here's evidence that I did the thing, right? If you can replace any sentence with I am a good scientist, it is an assertion, right? So something like I am deeply committed to interdisciplinary research, that's an assertion. I developed a plan that integrated eye tracking and behavioral accuracy to test attentional cueing. That is an actual, evidentiary statement. My outreach work will broaden participation in STEM. That's kind of in the middle, right? It could have more evidence. It's not just a straight assertion, but it needs more evidence. How will it do that, right? So something like, think about how you would replace the assertion, I'm a rigorous scientist, with actual evidence that is personal to you and what you have done, right? That's what you want to think about. So some self-assessments for your personal statement. Does every paragraph end with so what does this show about me and my potential, right? Every trait, so persistent, independent, collaborative, rigorous, has to have a specific story or a specific product evidence that you're pointing to. Intellectual merit and broader impact have to be there with their own headings. Don't miss your headings. It's important. And then, does the statement tell a scientific narrative, not your life story? This should be your story of you as a scientist, not you as a person, right? So if you answered no or not sure, that's a good point to start revising, right? Then we have the 2-page research plan, right? And that includes references, figures, headings. It's so much shorter that it feels, when you first start, you're like, wow, 2 pages is so short, right? And so what are the reviewers going to be asking about your research plan? Because again, right, they're evaluating you and your potential as a scientist. So this is evidence of your potential as a scientist. What will be measured, in whom, under what conditions, what results support your hypothesis, what the alternative result would be, and do you have limitations that are acknowledged and bounded? Every study has limitations, so you should be talking about them, right? Acknowledging a limitation and how you're going to address it is so much better than glossing over it or pretending that it doesn't happen, right? And this very much goes to feasibility. This design is feasible because, or if this hypothesis is null, this result will distinguish between 2 things, right? What do we learn whether the result is significant or not? And how do bounding our limitations make that possible? So something like a power analysis is very important, because then if we are sufficiently powered and we don't discover a result, that is still informative, right? So your 2 pages, not a lot of space. So you got to really be ruthless with it, right? You got to open with your problem and your gap, then your research question and central hypothesis. Don't bury them, say them straight out, be really forthright and early, right? Then your approach, how you're actually going to measure this, your expected outcomes and alternatives. So what do you think is going to happen? What results do you expect to get? And then what alternatives would be and how they are still informative, right? And then your intellectual merit and broader heading, they require those headings. Don't forget to do that. right? So you don't have to be comprehensive. It's 2 pages. You cannot be comprehensive. Prioritize the things that matter most, which are the things we've been talking about in this presentation, right? So when you're talking about feasibility, what will be measured, in whom, under what conditions, with what analysis, and then what results will actually support your hypothesis and what's your alternative result. It's what we've been talking about this whole time, right? So things, kinds of feasibility language, this approach allows inference about. If neither X nor Y are observed, this indicates an alternative, right? This approach is limited by blank, which we will address with blank, right? Anticipated limitations are not weaknesses, but unacknowledged problems are, right? So when you're thinking about what is my weakest point, I'm checking my feasibility, you go through and say, can a reviewer actually picture what I would do? For this, ask for help, ask for feedback, have somebody who doesn't know what you're working on read this. Another scientist, maybe not even in your field, and say, do you understand what's happening here? Does it make sense? Because it should be very easy to follow and flow and understand. It can be a complex idea, but you should communicate it in a very clear way, right? And you don't need to fix everything at once, right? Tackle one thing at a time. And finally, we have our letters. So you don't want 3 just generic letters. You need 3 letters from mentors, right? So help your letter writers. Give them a draft letter. Give them draft statements. Give them your CV. Give them bullet points that they can speak to for broader impact and intellectual merit with actual evidence. Do the work for them and you will get better letters, right? Say what the other letters are going to cover. Like, this person is going to talk about my experience in their lab, and this person is going to talk about my, mentorship and volunteer work, right? Be clear, have the letters do a job, right? Don't just have 3 letters that say you're great. Have each letter talk about how you are an investment in science in a different way and give them the evidence they need to do that. Right. And so, because they need to show that you have research potential, you're good at research. That's the name of the game, right? That you have intellectual independence. That's important for you being a good investment, that in the future, you're going to be an independent researcher on your own right, that you can communicate your findings, that you have broader impact, right? That you will contribute as a scientist to the society, and that you have a good fit for the work that you're actually proposing to do, which your 3 letter writers, at least one of your 3 letter writers, but hopefully all 3 of them, can speak to, that you do have the skills necessary for the project you're going to do. And that's a good way to fit in a little bit of feasibility even in your letters. So this is your application timeline. So I would recommend you start a minimum of 16 weeks out. Confirm your eligibility, your field of study, your deadline. Read previously funded fellowships. Like, it's actually very helpful to read what works, and see what that actually looks like. What does a 2-page research research plan draft actually look like, right? Then write a 1-page idea memo and get feedback on that. Then write a 0 draft. And I don't know if you're familiar with 0 drafts, they're very helpful. You essentially bullet point out your framing, your ideas, your flow, and you can get feedback on that before you start writing your whole proposal. Then at 8 weeks, complete a full rough draft, then get your mentor's feedback, do iterative revisions, incorporate that feedback, right? About a month out, send all of your letter materials, maybe even a little earlier than that, and get peer feedback. Then you should have your final edits about 2 weeks before and submit the week before, right? Early submission is helpful. I have never known an academic who did well with deadlines, but the deadline is actually is genuinely final. You should expect to submit early. Do not expect to submit on the day, right? And you should verify the deadline for your specific discipline in your specific year. Thank you very much, everyone. I hope this was helpful. If there are any outstanding questions, I can stick around for a little bit. But I know we're also at our 2 p.m. or your 1 p.m.
Yeah.
And yeah, I hope this was helpful. Thank you very much, everyone.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah. Is there any questions? We can probably we are a little bit over time, but we can probably have one or two quick questions if people have. You can also send emails to either to the OPAM committee or I'm not sure if Dr. Merrill, if you are okay. Maybe some of
Sure.
the people, yeah, they can send the email to you. Yeah. There's a question here. If you are a first year graduate student, are transcripts and coursework from undergraduate considered? Uh,
Um,
also, mm,
Usually not
okay,
really.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Unless you are applying as an like before you go to graduate school. Yes.
yeah, yeah. I saw somebody raise their hand. I'm not sure
Oh
if
yeah.
they,
Was there
yeah.
a hand raised?
No, I guess maybe they're just trying to clap.
Oh, well, thank
uh,
you. I appreciate that.
yeah, and would you mind like in the chat just yeah, yeah, exactly. Perfect.
I got it. Yes, you
Yeah.
are very welcome to ask me questions. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Then we'll put this recording online so people will have access to this. And
Yes. And
thank you again for the
yeah, I
wonderful
also have
talk here.
slides and a little sort of worksheet at the end of the slides that I'll send that might be helpful too.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah. Bye
Yeah,
everyone. Thank you.
see you. Bye.